Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I'm your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Cathryn Dhanatya. Cathryn is the founder and CEO of Growing Good. Growing Good is a high touch firm dedicated to providing personalized consulting, fundraising support, and organizational strategy. In addition to running Growing Good, Cathryn is a keynote speaker and has spoken on topics including disruption in the nonprofit space, giving for impact, fundraising strategy, servant leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion, career transitions, career in higher education and research, and the Asian American professional experience. You can find Cathryn by going to her website, growinggoodinc.com, or by emailing her at info@growinggoodinc.com. Hello, Cathryn. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I am so excited to dive into all the things Growing Good because I think we all need to make that impact and get involved with nonprofits and help nonprofits grow, but also the things we can learn from nonprofits in the profit space. So let's dive into everything. To start off, though, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Cathryn Dhanatya?
So, success has changed over time, right? When I started my career, as many young professionals, you want to get that big office, you want that title, you want the financial stability, right? We work really hard, you want to be able to enjoy that. And for me, when I reached that pinnacle of the C suite, having the big job, the title, the assistant, it felt really lonely. And I had this realization that I was the only one, right? I was the only woman. I was the only person of color. It was very hard to relate to people. I was a mom. There was all of these other things that were part of my identity that I didn't think about when I was 20. So success got redefined for me at that point, and I really thought about what mattered to me. And for me, it's having the privilege to be able to have peace of mind and to be able to choose what I want to do and to be able to refocus my desired impact in the world on things that I'm passionate about, things that I believe in, things that inspire me, and also at the same time being able to be financially stable enough to be able to afford my family and myself opportunities that I don't have to worry. I'm not worried about where our next meal is coming from or where we're going to live. And we have the opportunity to travel and explore and have all of these other educational privileges that a lot of people don't have. So I think where I'm at, I'm successful because I get to do everything I want in terms of my career. I get to work on interesting projects, as well as having the time and the space to be able to think, to be able to create, and to be able to be present for my family.
I love how you said that, but what sticks out to me even more throughout your journey and that transition framework, I should say, of where you really started to transition your journey is once you reached what growing up you thought success would look like, or even now, what our communities identify as that stamp of success, which for you was getting to management, getting to that C suite. You you felt like it was that lonely space that no one else was identifying with your experiences or other things that represent you. So I want to dive into that a little bit first because I think that's something a lot of us forget about on climbing and hitting different marks. That are we still aligning with where we want to be going? Do we still feel the need that success point or that pinnacle of our goal is really where we should be standing and what that could feel like once you reach it? Because a lot of times we are so driven in the journey of getting to that top of the mountain that we forget about how we're going to feel once we get there. So for you, going through that and then having that sense of feeling that loneliness, not feeling like it was everything that you thought it was going to be, how did that then shape everything you've been doing since then?
Well, it really made me pause, right? I needed to take a moment and kind of reassess. And I've done it in different points of my career. And if you look at my career, it's very atypical, it's very nonconformist. I think I've given my parents a couple heart attacks by just pivoting and changing where I'm going. But I think for me, it's about what made me think and refocus was at the end of the day, you have what do you have in life? You have your health, you have your family, you have your friends, and you have your name, right? Your reputation. And, you know, prestige and titles, like you can't really eat that. You can't really live that forever. And what's very interesting is once you don't have that, people forget. The true people who really don't matter, they forget, right? They want to talk to you when you have a fancy title, and when you don't, then it doesn't really matter. But I redefined success because I wanted to be happy. I wanted to have peace of mind. I didn't want to be stressed out and unpleasant and not able to hear the people that mattered in my life anymore. And so that's what made me really change was what do I want? How do I want to show up in the world? Do I want to show up as that kind of stress running around, never able to focus, never able to be present, trying to always climb, trying to always get that next thing? Or was it more important to me to be able to be present for people that needed it and that I needed to be there for? And I think the other piece of it was that being able to say that it's okay that I don't want the same things that society wants for me or says I should have or should want was very freeing, right? Like you said, we're all on this climb and everyone's telling you need to do this and you need to do this and you need to do that and you should achieve this and you should achieve that. And maybe it's because I achieved them at a relatively young age or young point in my career. It didn't necessarily fulfill me the same way. And so I think it's really important for everybody to look at who they are and what they want. Because for some people, that's what they want and that's what makes them happy. And that's amazing. Like, go be like amazing C-suite person, executive, right? But I think having the wisdom to be able to understand what truly matters to you and the life that you want to live and how you want to show up in the world will give you the peace of mind and will also help you feel successful because you could be successful on paper but you yourself feel like you're a failure too.
And I want to touch upon that one more little question I have because I think you brought this up earlier, and I think it's really important for individuals in our community to hear your response on this. But before or after, I should say, wow, my words today. And then after that, we're going to go into the nonprofit space and what you're doing. But before that, I want to go into it. What is it also like? You hit that C-suite. You had mentioned your parents, you probably gave them multiple heart attacks as well, but especially in the Asian American culture, where hitting certain marks is really looked upon and praised. And when you think outside the box, it's not as sometimes looked upon in the same way. So for you, what has that journey been like as you've had self-discovery? Have you gone through things? And what advice would you give individuals who, might be going through that?
Well, I came from a very traditional immigrant background. My parents both immigrated in the late 60s, early 70s from Thailand. They worked very hard. They were way more educated than they could find a job. They both had graduate degrees, but could only open a restaurant because no one would hire them because of their accents. So they struggled. and their dreams were for their daughters to have a better life in the US than they did. And my sister and I both graduated from great universities, went on to have great careers. And I think the first time that was very hard was when I decided to leave academia. I'd been the youngest assistant dean at the University of Southern California at USC, and had kind of achieved this pinnacle of I could have this job for the rest of my life and be comfortable and it be easy, have respect. People were like, you're a dean, all of these things, right? And I was burnt out and I just didn't want to do it anymore. So I left. And I think my mother was just in tears. Like I remember her vividly just crying and saying, what do you mean you have a stable job for the rest of your life and you're walking away from that for what? And I'm like, I'm not sure. And it turned into a job that was in the C-suite at a big, huge cancer research funder, and got to do a lot of really interesting things there. But at the time, there was a period of, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And they're like, you have a family, you have like responsibilities. What are you doing? And it was a hard struggle because it was, as the dutiful Asian daughter, I was supposed to be stable, right? I was supposed to have this and this and this, and I had done all of those things. But I think when I left, when I left the nonprofit kind of big funder world to open my own shop, my parents were also like, are you sure? Like, you want to do this? But I think what it came down to was having the confidence to know that this is your life. And at the end of the day, you can't live it for other people. And so if your parents have a certain perspective, they only want what's best for you, or the majority of people want what's best for you, or what they think is what's best for you, but only you can walk in your shoes and live your life. And if the path that you're on is killing you or making you not the vibrant person that you could be, or giving you the potential of who you are, the possibilities of who you could be, then you got to think about it. They're not going to be there every step of the way. At the end of the day, it's you. At the end of the day, no matter how many people you love, your children, your family, your partner, it's you. And so you have to make those decisions to be able to look at yourself in the mirror, to be able to move forward. And like I said, show up in the way that you want to be. And so that's my advice is it's okay to be scared, but be brave, right? Like be brave and bet on yourself because usually you're probably right about what's best for you.
And I love how you said that, because one thing that you mentioned was the point about no matter who you are, your parents only want the best for you. And that was literally something I was going to say from what you were saying. So I love how you beat me to it and mentioned that point. But for you, as you decided to go into the nonprofit space, what was the driving force in your journey to decide that was the next step and you really wanted to go into that nonprofit?
Well, to be honest, it started off with fear because I wasn't quite ready to like jump straight into like from being in an academic for all of my career up until that point. I felt like going straight into corporate America was going to be too much of a culture shift. So I was like, okay, I'm going to kind of go into this nonprofit area. And the other part of it was I have a very deep seated belief and passion for doing the right thing. Like, I think that whatever career I chose, I needed to feel like I was making an impact, whether and making the world a little bit better than when I left it. And so the nonprofit sector in that regard was very much in line with the ethos that I had. I would not be a great I do a lot of strategic planning and other types of consulting. I would not be a great strategic planner for a widget maker, right? Because I need to be passionate about the mission. Not that those are not important, but absolutely, I'm not that right person. And so that's even how I came up with my business's name, which is Growing Good, which is the idea that by the work that we do, we're planting seeds of good and helping organizations that are growing good in the world. And so we may never see that growth at the end of the day, but you still got to plant those seeds so that the future can be better.
I love that. And I think it is so important to plant the seeds in the beginning or when you start to pivot within an organization, whether it's profit or non for profit, to really be able to have the organization grow. You do that a lot with your company and working with nonprofits to help with strategic planning. For you, what have you seen a lot of organizations when building out their strategic plan might not think about, especially in the nonprofit sector, that you think is a go-to that everyone should be thinking about?
So I always tell nonprofits, you have to have a plan and you have to have a point of view, right? And what I mean by plan isn't a strategic plan. I mean like a real business plan. We have so many people. I mean, people go into nonprofits because they really care about the mission of what they're doing. They are the most passionate, mission driven people that you will ever, and professionals you will ever meet, right? Because they're understanding that you're not going in to make money, right? This is not the goal. But I think to an extreme, people say, well, they go into the nonprofit sector and they believe I just need to do good. And it's like, well, actually, you also have to have a business plan. You have to figure out what your revenue is in terms of fundraising, right? Like, what are the donor dollars so that you can do your work? How are you going to be able to sustain staff? Are you going to be able to do your programming if you don't have any money? No. So there is a need to understand that sort of business model and professionalization, which a lot of nonprofits that I've worked with and have come across don't do very well. So having that business mindset of understanding, where's your money coming from? How do you diversify? How do you create a value proposition that explains your value to people? And what is your, instead of return on investment, what is your return on impact? Right? People give because they believe in what you're doing, but they're not going to continue to give if you're not showing some sort of measurable impact and outcome. And so being able to really document and explain that and articulate that work is really important. And the second point is you have to have a point of view. Organizations can be built in a lot of different ways, but you have to have a point of view on what kind of organization do you want to be? Do you want to be driven by grassroots, small scale donors? You build in a certain way. Are you really looking at more of the major gifts and major donors? You build in a different way. Are you looking for something in the middle? But you have to have a point of view. You have to have a point of view on who are you going to take money from and why? Who are you not going to take money from? That's probably even more important, right? And so having points of view help to shape your mission and really align the operations and the fundraising side, but also help to build your organization to be more full, more comprehensive, and more likely to be sustainable.
And like you said, it really allows you to have those roots to grow long term
Mhm.
because a lot of it, and I love how you say the point of view, is you need to set those benchmarks, those where you're aiming so that you know who you should be talking to. You know how to organize your plans and everything.
Well, and you want to build for flexibility. You don't want to build so that there's only one path, right? So there's an example of one of my co-founders when she was working for a startup and they were building something and they said, okay, well, we want to build this specific lunar rover, right? They were an engineering firm. And she said, no, you want to build lunar mobility. Because then if you don't build a rover or you build a huge human moving machine, you're still successful, right? So building in that ability to pivot and to be nimble while also having a clear understanding of who you are is really important. And that's where that point of view becomes critical.
And I love how you mentioned too the point of view of who you are, because a lot of times we can get mixed up, especially while building with the goals in mind and hitting, for example, with a nonprofit, bringing in those revenues so you can make the good. But where are your ethics and who are you trying to serve? I think is so important as well. So for you, as you work with individuals who are building up nonprofits and trying to grow their nonprofits, when you talk to them about their point of view, what are some things while you're on the journey that you kind of try to keep them focused on that point of view and ways you do that?
Well, I think that the first thing that I always tell nonprofits, or I tell all businesses, I also work a lot in the startup area too, is your name matters, especially a nonprofit. Your reputation matters. So you don't want to be basically so diffuse that no one knows who you are, right? Because people don't invest in vagueness in general. They want to be able to give or be a part of something that makes sense to them. And so, yes, chasing money is important in some ways, but chasing money to the point where you have no identity becomes actually very dangerous in the long term for sustainability. Because if you're everything to everyone, then you're nothing, right? So that's where the knowing yourself is really important, and understanding that your reputation matters, especially as a nonprofit. But I would say, I would argue all corporations. Some people can, if you're big enough, you can survive scandals. But for a nonprofit, it's different in the sense, like, if there's a huge scandal, people are not going to give money to you anymore, and you're going to close your doors. So being above board, taking that extra step to not do things quickly, but do things correctly, right? Making sure you're compliant, making sure you're transparent, making sure that who you're taking money from, who you're promoting, all of those things matter, because at the end of the day, people have to trust you. And if they don't trust your organization, they're not going to donate to your organization, because they're not getting a direct benefit except for maybe a little bit of a tax deduction. But for the majority of, they're not getting something directly from you. You're not giving them a product they can use. You're not doing any of those things. So you're really in the space of building trust and having these people trust you to do something good in the world that they believe in. And so that is a very precious thing that needs to be respected and nurtured over time.
You and I talked previously about a really interesting, well, a few very interesting things we're going to touch upon, but one I actually have never thought that much about that I loved your take on, and that's the things for profits can really learn from nonprofits and implement into their business. So, what are some things that you have seen working in the nonprofit realm, especially being a former C-suite executive, that have really been eye-opening moments where you like, if only corporations or businesses that were for non for profits implemented or approached things this way, they could grow as well.
Well, I think there's a like 5 key things, right? I think that I've kind of distilled in terms of that I think business leaders of all stripes, nonprofit or for profit, but for profit especially, um, can learn from nonprofits. The mission matters, right? It's really important that if your organization to thrive, that there is some sort of mission that everyone can get behind. Because if everybody on your organization is rowing towards the same thing, whether that is making widgets or whether that's like building the next AI thing or whatever it is, people in organizations and workers, if they believe in a mission and are animated and passionate about the mission, they're going to drive your progress forward. So having a clear mission is really important, and nonprofits are usually really good at that, because it's all about mission, right? With a nonprofit, it's like, what are we doing in the world? The second one, I think, is knowing your donors, or what I say, knowing your customers. Nonprofits have to work really hard to figure out who it is that they're trying to cultivate and they're trying to get their message to. So for startups and companies, I'm like, you got to really know your you got to really know your audience. You got to really know who is trying to buy in to what you're doing. Um, and I think as the generations change with a population, and we were talking about Generation Alpha and Generation Z, they care more and more about where their products come from. They care about how it's made. They care if it's ethical. They care if it's affecting climate change. And they are more, there's been multiple studies. There was a McKinsey study a few years ago that they said like 70% of Generation Z would pay more for a product if they felt it was ethically sourced and didn't hurt the environment, right? That's a huge key point that corporations in the future need to really think about, right? That it matters. And that this generation, more than any, care about non-performative actions, right? If you're just doing like, okay, it's Pride Month, we're going to put out some rainbow flags, but then when it comes, the rubber hits the road, they disappear, that matters to those consumers, right? So I think that that's important. And then I think the other two were, you know, being able to build bridges and partnerships. Like corporations are often in competition, but being able to, when you can partner, really does amplify your ability to get things completed. When we look at the research side, you know, moving faster. And at the end of the day, not having that deficit thinking that we're all scarcely looking at just one small pie, but we build bigger pies, right? To be able to look. And also, I think you can always hire pragmatic optimists because I think toxic people cost a lot of money and they cost a lot of other, no matter how talented you are, toxic people will always drain your organization. So hiring people who are optimistic but have the attention and the capabilities to see all the difficulties and how to get there but still believe that you can is really a game changer for most organizations.
I love all the points you made, especially the ones about the toxic behavior, because I feel like you hit the nail on the head with that one. I've worked for big organizations where productivity is out there, but the turnaround on people leaving is high because one or two people in the corporation. And then it goes into, okay, now we have to find new hires. Now we have to train. Now it's going to be also catching up. So having those people that really drain your capabilities as an individual and make you want to leave, when you do leave for an organization, there's a domino effect in that too. And the revolving door hinders the growth potential and how quickly you could get from idea to implementation. And really, even in a nonprofit space, being able to put on events and raise money to give towards the, where whatever the thing you're raising money for, charities, different organizations, whatever that is, and being able to pay that forward can hinder.
Absolutely. And I think the issue is that it's not just financial, it's also capacity, right? Like you said, it's personnel time, it's emotional bandwidth, right? All of those things get sucked out when you foster an environment that allows for really bad behavior or people who are bad actors. And the other issue is it becomes really hard to get rid of that bad actor, right? The way that our labor laws are, there's a lot of process to hire. Once you hire somebody who's a problem, it's very difficult to just let them go, right? And so, or to do it in the right way. And so in that process, you're basically bleeding out positive resources to try to deal with this negative person. And then you have to try to figure out, well, if I want to get this person out, then there's an entire rigmarole around that. So being able to hire really strong candidates who, I always say like pragmatic optimists, like I want to have people who really believe that they can make the world better or that we can achieve our goals. But I also want them to be critical enough to know what the pain points are and how to solve them. So you got to be pragmatic. You can't just be pie in the sky, everything's wonderful. that's nice, but you also, when the rubber hits the road, how do we solve? How do we get around? How do we get over? How do we get under? How do we keep moving forward when it's not so easy?
And that's something I think is really important to think about and have the mindset on, is how do you work through a problem? When I was in college, I was in a competition, a startup competition for businesses, and it you had to be nominated and then be selected from like all these undergrad, graduate, PhD students and business owners. So it was really the top of the top people looking to get their idea from roots to having funding for it. And it became really competitive. And it was a 72-hour competition to bring this idea that you had pitched with your team and then get funding for it. And you would actually really get funding if you won. If you were the top three, they'd actually give you money to start your business. And when I was sitting there throughout the 72 hours, the rest of my team hated me. Why they hated me was because every time they threw an idea of how the business is going to work, I was like, "Okay, and what if this happens? How do we handle this problem?" And I'd keep throwing problems at it. And they're like, "Well, that's not likely to actually happen." And I go, "Okay, but what if this scenario does happen? How are we going to solve it? How would the customer actually feel and be able to go through it?" And I said to them, it's not because I sat there and I thought the idea we came up with as a group and we're trying to build was bad. It's because I'm trying to figure out the ways that as things might pop up in real time, we already thought of the solution. We've already tried to stop that issue from occurring. And a lot of times we forget about that aspect of asking the hard questions and kind of throwing mud at the idea to see, okay, where can the problem happen and how can it already be solved so the problem doesn't actually come up long term.
Absolutely. And I think what you were doing was invaluable to your team because it's easy. I always say, don't listen too much to the compliments,
Mhm.
but sometimes you should listen to the naysayers. And part of it is because at the end of the day, stuff goes sideways all the time, right? And if there's somebody who's coming from a good place, from a place of they actually care about your success, and they're saying, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't right. This isn't right. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? They're trying to make you better. And so being able to take constructive feedback and think about it and say, like, well, are they right? If they are, how do I address that? Right? How do I incorporate that critical feedback so that I can be better? And I think as a current career, I tell people I ask a lot of really hard questions. That's my job. I have organizations really think hard about what they're doing, and it's to make them better. I'm not trying to tear you down. And I think that's where it's different. There are people that are just malicious, that are trying to tear you down, and then you need to just zone them out. But if there are people who are the truth tellers in your life, who want what's best, but are able to tell you those hard truths, you need to hold on to those people because they're going to make you better. They're going to make you achieve faster, and they're going to really up your game because you have to be able to answer those questions. And if you can't answer hard questions, then you got to get out of business. I mean, that's the reality of it.
For you, one thing that I think a lot of us want to do and just don't always know what direction to move or how to, I'm going to say, use the word bet, is giving back and giving back to charities. A lot of times we all get a lot of emails, a lot of, mailings, a lot of phone calls about amazing organizations that want and need funding to be able to provide resources to individuals who really need it. But one thing you and I had talked about previously as well is the importance of understanding what organizations, when you get that call, is worth the money and align with the goals that you have. And you brought that up previously as well, is making sure you're in alignment with the good that organization's doing, and really making sure the funding that individuals are paying also goes to what that return, that turnaround of the
Mhm.
values and everything like that. So for you, when you have conversations with individuals about, okay, how can we make sure money that we're paying, or really I'm talking on the topic of money, not necessarily time, but as
Mhm.
an individual, money that we're allocating, what is the best organizations for ourselves to donate to, and how can we kind of gauge that?
So there's a couple of just easy kind of at your fingertip things. There's the Guide Star, there's Charity Navigator, there's the Better Business Bureau that actually will rate charities in terms of like their quality, how they spend their money, how their budgets. There's an entire formula of, how much of their budget goes towards operating costs, how much goes towards programming, and they give them a charity rating. And in some ways they've been kind of vetted, right? The other thing too is you could do your own due diligence, which I actually recommend people do. Every charity above a certain amount has to have, I think if they make more than $100,000 a year, they have to have a 990 that is public, which is their tax filings. And from that tax filing, you can see who they've given money to, what programs they've spent, how much all of their key employees make, what their operating costs are. So if you see an organization that says like, 80% of our operating costs are like of our programming, every dollar that comes in goes towards operating, you might be like, okay, maybe I need to rethink what this is, right? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't pay charities to be able to operate, because that's a fallacy too. We can't have 100% of every dollar go to just programming, because then who's going to run the programming? But there's a more healthy kind of rule of thumb that ideally you want to be around 20% operating to 80% programming and other things. So you can do that. Also, don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you don't like the answers, that's okay. There's other organizations that'll probably be aligned to what you're thinking and wanting to do, right? There's millions of nonprofits out there. I think nonprofits make up actually the bulk. I think they said there are more people employed by nonprofits than in the US than multiple sectors like transportation, finance, and like what was the other one? And commerce. There were more people by employed by nonprofits. So there's a nonprofit out there that'll work for you, right? And also understanding who you are as a donor. What matters to you? Is it an organization that's really doing like the grassroots in the community work, right? They're not going to have as much infrastructure, and you're going to have to kind of accept that they may not be the most efficient. But if that's what matters to you, then that's where you give. If you're looking for kind of broad based, like tons of programs, and there are, there are nonprofits that have billions, right? So like, and work all over the world. So really kind of matters too, like who you are and why you're giving. Are you giving because it's a cause that specifically matters to you or somebody you care about? Or are you trying to be a part of a movement, or are you trying to make some sort of change? And then look through the vast amounts of nonprofits, do a little bit of due diligence, ask questions, and make sure you feel good about it. That's part of part of giving is to help people, but it's also you should feel good about it, and you should feel proud about it that you're supporting this organization. So, don't be afraid to ask questions.
I think that's so important. And I think you gave some amazing tips in there, the tips and tricks for individuals who might not be working in the nonprofit sector, but definitely want to give back to the nonprofit sector. Because I get calls all the time. And honestly, I love making an impact and doing good for my community for, my country, but also internationally. There's different environments internationally that you can also help with. And sometimes it can be hard to differentiate what best aligns and where that money is, what it's really needed for in that moment, and will it make that impact you're hoping it will make. So I love that you were able to provide some of those tips and tricks, and I will personally be using them now, when I think about things.
Oh, and also one other thing too on the 990s. Let's say you can't get it through Charity Navigator or GuideStar or ProPublica. They mostly list all of them. Any nonprofit in the US legally has to provide you their 990 if you ask them. And also you could ask them about their compliance in terms of like their fundraising registrations, that they're actually legally able to solicit donations in your state. All of those things are good questions to ask, because if they say, well, we didn't know we needed to register, and you're like, okay, well, maybe you aren't the most compliant or together nonprofit, right? So 44 states in the US currently require fundraising registrations. So, and it's not where the nonprofit is located, it's where you're located as a donor. So they have to be registered in your state to be able to accept your money legally.
Well, you really ended that one on an important tidbit that I think we're now all going to think about. And it's so informative because it's even like soliciting phone calls. We didn't realize until a few years ago that companies couldn't necessarily call you back, depending on what state you live on,
Mhm.
um, without you previously approving it. So all this knowledge is really helpful in us not only being able to make sound decisions, but know and be able to align with, okay, is this the most built up organization? Where are their goals aligned? Do I want that organization that is doing all these different events in the community, or do I want something where it's a wider span and they're not necessarily doing all these community events, but they're paying it forward by giving all these materials that are needed? What are the ways that you want them to have the touch points as well? um you,
Well, and I also always advise donors, there's multiple ways to give, and we forget about that. Money is like only one way. You can give your time, you can give your expertise. A lot of nonprofits really could use help with, like, if you're an amazing website designer or podcaster, to help them like come do their, their materials for their outreach or whatever it is. Like, that is a huge form of giving that we don't give enough credit to. And so I think, being understanding that there's multiple ways that you can get involved, and it doesn't always have to mean writing a check. Writing a check is great. The other thing too is you can also give your influence. You can recommend a nonprofit that matters to you. You can amplify their message in ways that are meaningful, whether it's through social media, whether through your contacts or your connections. Those all are hugely important to having nonprofits become sustainable and continue to grow. Like, all of those types of giving are important and they need to be cultivated.
well, Catherine, that being said, how can people connect with you if they want to get in touch with you?
So they can definitely find me on LinkedIn. I'm very good about responding to my LinkedIns. So it's just my first name, Cathryn, Cathryn, and then last name Dhanatya, Dhanatya. You can definitely go on my website where you can email me, which is growinggoodinc.com. And that's, I think, the two easiest ways to reach out to me.
Well, Catherine, thank you for all of your insight today.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on. It was amazing talking to you and it was really fun.
I truly enjoyed it, and you really opened my eyes to a lot of different things. And I know the audience probably feels the same way. And a few of those key takeaways from today's conversation is, at the end of the day, you have your name, and that plays into your reputation. So it doesn't matter necessarily what others want you to be doing or the trajectory they think you should go on. You have your name. What do you want to stand by? And what do you want that reputation to be built on? As well as it is your life, so only you can live your life. It plays into the same sentiment we were just talking about, as well as have a plan and have a point of view. I think they play hand in hand, like Cathryn was saying, but they're both so uniquely important to have that plan in place, but also have that perspective, have that view, have that outlook, as well as what to measure, especially within nonprofits, is measure your impact. What is the impact you're trying to make? When we have goals as individuals as well, not necessarily from the nonprofit sector, but when we want to give back to our community, when we have an idea as a group, what is the impact you're trying to make? As well as don't do things quickly, do things mindfully. I love how Cathryn mentioned this because sometimes, whether we're starting a business, we're starting a new project, we're doing planning an event, right? A family event, a trip, whatever it might be. It does not just have to be organizational oriented. We sometimes go from 0 to 100 very quickly and feel the need as pressure starts to arise just to get things done. But when you don't take the time to mindfully do them and think through the process mindfully, you end up just rushing it and delivering something, an experience, a business, whatever it might be, that has a lot of holes in it and does not represent who you are and does not represent the things you had in mind when you originally started, as well as understand who you are as a donor. I loved how Cathryn brought this up because it's really important to understand that as individuals, we all look at things differently and we all have different goals. So, whether that is monetarily and what that represents, or if we want to give back as that website designer that Cathryn had mentioned, what are the ways we like to get involved? What are the things that we align with, that we want to see happen in our community, in our environment? And understand that so you can understand the right organizations to give to. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Cathryn Dhanatya. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.